Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for another breakfast chat. And today we're going to talk a little bit about rest and sleep. All right, these are topics don't get covered enough, and it's bad enough when I've seen it come up in my comments section. I saw someone say, "Well, the amount of sleep you need really varies from person to person. You might be okay on 6 or 7 hours." I'm going to completely disagree, and we're not talking about the general populace. I'm talking about people who are actually lifting and training. If you look at a lot of the data that's out there, yes, there's a big variation in which humans need. I mean, we learned this in school. I learned this in school over 20 years ago, just taking psych classes, that there was data even then suggesting that for general health purposes, cognition, right, things like that, memory, that some people could get by on 6 hours of sleep, 5 hours of sleep, be perfectly healthy, perfectly fine. They wouldn't have really elevated cortisol. Their memory works great, everything else. Other people needed as many as 9 or 10, right? Those are the two extremes. That's the spread. But keeping in mind, those people in the two groups are pretty small. In other words, someone who can do it on 5 hours represents probably less than 10% of the population. People who need 10 hours is less than 10% of the population. But if you fall in that further range, if you're one of those rare people, if you don't get 9 or 10 hours of sleep at night, you're groggy, you have memory problems, cognition problems, right? You have hormone issues, everything else. Some people do need that much. But when we are talking about people who are training, you probably need more sleep. And I'm going to say 8 hours. That's your baseline. If you are not finding a way to get at least 8 hours of sleep, you are not going to maximize your muscle growth and your recovery. And if you can't maximize your muscle growth and recovery, you need to bring your training volumes down, right? You need to bring them down because they're too high. They're too high. You are not going to make maximum muscle growth, so you shouldn't be trying to stimulate maximum muscle growth. Does that make sense? In other words, if the other end isn't optimized over here, we are wasting time with the additional training. You need to reel it in, bring it down. It's too much. Because again, it comes down to, hey, maybe you should only be stimulating 80% of the possible muscle growth if you're only going to sleep enough to do it. It doesn't make sense to push the limit. And in fact, the same people, I can tell you right now, anyone who feels like they need a pre-workout is probably screwed. They should just be training less. You shouldn't need the pre-workout. Don't take it and push yourself beyond your recovery because your fatigue management's poor, your sleep is poor. So what do you think happens when you take the pre-workout? So that you can, quote unquote, train harder. You're probably going to make less progress as a result because you're just going to overtax yourself. Same thing, let's come over and talk about the amount of training you do. It's been brought up when I tell people I do not program more than 4 days a week of lifting for any of my clients. If you feel like you need to do more on the off days, do cardio. Do some conditioning work. You should not be doing any sort of taxing resistance training more than about 4 days a week. And when I see other YouTubers out there promoting and telling people, oh, you can do this, no, you shouldn't. You guys should not be pushing that. Because the guys who are pushing it are either small, I'm not going to name names, but I can think of a couple, they're small. These are guys who talk about making gains and they have a fat-free mass index at 23. You are nowhere near the natural limit. Some of these guys have been training 10 plus years. Right? Maybe you don't know anything about training. Maybe you need to quit giving advice on how to get bigger when you can't do it. And one of the big guys who's done it out there has used gear admittedly. He's not even lifetime natty and he's still not that big, pushing 5-day full body. Clearly it doesn't work for him. Clearly it doesn't work for him. Eric Helms. You guys have watched me do training 7 days a week. I've done it. But what did I have to do to make that work? I told you guys, in order for me to pull that off, I was sleeping 10 hours every night. 10 hours. Okay? If you're going to train more than 4 days a week, you probably need to be sleeping 9 or 10 hours. If you're training hard, You're probably not, though, if you're able to do 5, 6, 7 days a week. You're probably not training hard at all. You're lying to yourself. Okay? I had to sleep 10 hours a day. I had to eat 4,500 calories a day. I was in a slow bulk the entire time I did it. I still overreached. Okay? In spite of that, in spite of a perfect lifestyle, I still reached an overreach state where my lifts started going down. I'm not saying I didn't get some good lifts during it for the few months I did it, but it wasn't sustainable. It was an experiment I ran myself. And I told you guys when I was doing it, my clients do not do this. I do not program more than 4 days of lifting a week. It's like these goofballs who are like, well, I see this all the time in coaching groups online and lifters and other people. Well, I do push-pull legs 6 days a week or upper-lower 6 days a week. It's like you're either training like a fucking pussy or you are not maximizing your progress doing that. It's going to be one of the two. Or you up your dose. You up your dose. Some fake natties who train that way. But you're not going to do that 6 days a week and make good progress. You're not going to do it. In fact, push-pull legs is for people who only want to train 3 days a week. There could be a valid protocol. If you want to train 3 days a week, push-pull legs might make sense because you have a squat, bench, deadlift day there, etc. There's some pretty strong jack guys who do that. I know some who do that. Right? Number one, they do a ridiculous amount of volume on those days. They're doing like 10 sets of squats. Some of them are doing like 10 sets of deadlifts, plus all the accessory work. And I know guys who train like that, but they train really high volume, and they're all on gear. All of them. Push-pull legs is for 3 days a week, though. It's not for people who want to train higher frequency. It doesn't work that well. It really doesn't. And I'm not saying there aren't exceptions, but those exceptions to the rule do not mean you. You shouldn't need to train more than 4 days a week to maximize your progress. You shouldn't need to. You guys see what some of my clients do. You see the numbers that some of them are hitting I put up. You see their lifts. Those guys, every single one of them train 4 days per week. Some of them do conditioning, GPP, cardio on their off days. Some of them, depending upon what they do. A lot of those guys compete in their own different sports too. We only lift 4 days a week. There's no good reason to go beyond that. Right? There's no actual good reason to do so. If you feel like you're not getting enough training stimulus from that, number one, you could go do some cardio on your off days. If you just need to stay active, hey, that's fine. Some active recovery, some conditioning, some cardio. Hey, that's great. You can do that on your off days. In fact, I would recommend that you do that. It would be a good idea. Some active recovery. But if you feel like you're not able to get sufficient training in 4 days a week to maximize your strength and growth, you are either training like a complete pussy or your programming sucks. Those extra days off are a benefit. You should need those. If your training is anywhere near optimized, you need those 3 days of not lifting every week. Okay? You need them. Just like you need that 8 hours of sleep. And I promise you, you guys who follow those rules, you will get better gains as a result. And you do what you have to do to get the 8 hours. There's no excuse to take melatonin, adjust your diet, learn to de-stress, wind down in the evening, quit looking at your phone, quit watching TV before bed. That's your problem. Fix it. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.